And earlier in the show intro, I talked a little bit, kind of half jokingly, about how Ben True is going to make you proud, become the first Dartmouth alum to win the New York City Marathon. It is going to be his debut. Going to try to overcome his disappointment of not making the Olympics again. He's got to be one of the fastest Americans never to make an Olympic team. But if he wins New York, everybody, that will be forgiven. But he's not the only American in this race. There's 2 guys with sub 210 PBs, 2 more with sub 212, and then I think 4 total after that under 214. Noah Droddy leads the list in terms of guys who have run a marathon a marathon before at 209.09. Olympian Jared Ward, 209.25 is in there. Nathan Martin, the unheralded guy, 211.05 for 9th in the Marathon Project last year. Elkanah Kibet, 211.31. Shadrach Biwak, Kevin Lewis, Brian Shader, and John Ranieri all have broken 214 as well. Of these guys, we'll probably try to talk to some of them tomorrow, but what do we know? What can we expect from them?
So what the interesting thing about this is 2 of the most intriguing guys. So you got the fastest guy in the field and then the most intriguing debut in terms of Americans, Noah Droddy and Ben True. Neither of them have sponsors as of this moment, which is pretty interesting, I would say. 209.09 guy, and then Ben True, obviously, 4th at the Olympic trials. But I don't know what to expect. I mean, Noah Droddy, so he started working a full-time job. I talked to him yesterday, and he said his training's been going pretty well, but he's now a warehouse manager out in Colorado for SOS Hydration. And so, he's on his feet a little bit, but he's basically said it took me a little bit to get into the rhythm of running before work, then working, and then, working out again in the afternoon after he's done with work. But, he's never done a build-up like this. He's always been a sponsored pro for his marathons. So that's a little interesting for him. I haven't really talked to any of the other Americans about their training or anything. I am interested. I mean, Jared Ward, he's been the top American in New York City the last 2 times this race was held. In 2018 and 2019, he was 6th in both of them. But since then, he hasn't really done much. The Olympic trials, he was only 27th. Then he was 17th in London last fall, and he was 35th at the Marathon Project in 216. So I'm kind of curious to see what's up with him. We know he's got the talent, but the last year has not been very well. He was only 16th at the US 20K championships back in September. So can he get back on a course where he's had success in the past? And then these other guys, I mean, I assume one of them will run well, but if you look at like Nathan Martin and Kevin Lewis, they're both guys who ran PBs at the Marathon Project, but they're not really household names or anything like that. Elkanah Kibet and Shadrach Biwak. Shadrach Biwak's had success in New York as well. He's been top 10 3 times, but he hasn't run a good marathon in 3 years. And then one guy I'm interested in is Brian Schrader, because if you remember last year, he's the guy who led the first half of the Olympic marathon trials. He got that big lead, and he ended up dropping out, but the fact he was confident that he could run, I think around 209 on that course, he went for it. So if he has that kind of belief, I'm just kind of interested to see what he can do in this race as well. And then John Ranieri, he's been training pretty well in Flagstaff. I remember last year he did the treadmill half marathon world record, and he ran it in Flagstaff or something like that. I don't know what his training's been like for that build up. So yeah, what I'm saying, Robert, is this is a pretty wide open race for top American. Like Ben True, if his build-ups goes well, like Ray Tracy told me his build-up's been going well. He's very pleased with how he's adapted to it. He thinks it's been good for his body because the track training was really beating him up. Remember, Ben's 35 years old at this point. So he actually thinks he's been able to stay in one piece better with marathon training than track training. But again, it's his debut.
It's going to be really interesting. Some of these guys, you talked about Brian Schrader, but he was only 12th at New Haven 20K. Why would I expect anything from him? Jared Ward, if he doesn't run well, are we sticking a fork in him? I mean, to be honest, seriously, what has he done that's really significant? But if Ben True is the top American, really runs well as top 3 or 4 in this thing, it's going to make me wonder, has he been in the wrong event the wrong time? I mean, I never viewed him sort of as a guy that was better the longer he got, but maybe he has. He never liked the 10K on the track. It was boring to him, but he was pretty good at it. But this is a guy that's been training alone for much of his career. The grind of the marathon is not, if he's not in a pack, I don't think it's going to bother him. He's used to that. So it really would be interesting if this is his event. If he does really well, I'm going to think, wow, he should have been running the marathon the entire time, his entire career.
I'm not going to think that. I mean, this is a guy who was 6th in the world in the 5,000 meters in 2015. You know, he's made multiple U.S. World Championship teams. Okay, he didn't win a U.S. title on the track, but he's never going to be close to 6th in the world in the marathon. So, look, his best event was the 5K. He happened to coincide in a pretty strong era for the United States in the 5K. Guys like Bernard Lagat, Galen Rupp, Paul Chalimo. But I don't think we're going to be like, oh my God, he should have been in the marathon the whole time. He had a very good long career in the 5,000 meters and was one of the best in the world.
But never an Olympian.
Okay. Is he going to be an Olympian in the marathon, Robert?
John, I'm not sure if he would have been an Olympian in the marathon. And I feel a little bad for bringing that up, but that's just kind of how that Joe Public judges runners. But it's so arbitrary. I mean, I doubt Ben True, as a Mainer, guy that lives up in the Northeast, was a Donald Trump supporter. But I mean, I only say that because of the immigration laws, in the sense of Ben True would have been an Olympian like 30 years ago, before all these runners that were born in Africa became U.S. citizens. I mean, 2016, he's 5th. But look who beat him. And the top 3 were all born in Africa: Bernard Lagat, Hassan Mead, Paul Chalimo. And America is a land of immigrants. Don't misunderstand me, but I'm just saying, like, with our immigration policies in the 1960s, Ben True certainly would have been an Olympian. So it's a unfortunate way we're judged. Runners are judged, but, I had to bring it up.
So what do you expect? Do you think he'll be a good marathoner?
I didn't until you told me that the coach thought he was going to run between 208 and 210. So it's got me more interested.
I mean, immigration policies, there's just ebbs and flows with talent. When someone's Olympian, when there's not. You can't, I mean, everything isn't done in a perfect environment. Ben True's not an Olympian. He's not going to be an Olympian. I'll get it out there. This race, a good run with this field, you better be top 3, I think, in my book. And as we're talking about this field, I think there's some chances for the Americans to do well because there's not a lot of depth. But if guys who are totally unsponsored are in the top 3 at New York City, is that an indication of how well they ran? You're not going to be able to get top 3 unless you run well, right? I mean, there's just no way around it. Because there's, like some guy, like the guy who was 11th place at the Olympics is in this field. He's better than Noah Droddy.
Right. Well, I think it's also an indication, like Nell Rojas she was 6th in Boston. She's unsponsored.
Right. And is that a life earth-shattering run? I don't think so.
No, it's a good run. I think getting third still, you're still going to have to run a very, very good race to finish on the podium as an American here. What I do think is interesting, though, is Robert said earlier, Noah Droddy, he wanted to run the Worlds, and then USATF comes out with this criteria saying, actually, we're basing it off of full marathon results and not off of the descending order list, which he would have made it in off of. But there is still a chance for an American to get on that team, because right now, the 2 guys on the team behind Galen Rupp are Colin Mickow, who was 6th in Chicago, and Colin Benny, who was 7th in Boston. So if an American finishes 6th in this race, they would bump Colin Benny off. And I think it's very possible, given the lack of total studs near the top of the race, to have an American finish 6th place, and that would put them in the driver's seat for one of those World Championship marathon spots. So Noah Droddy, talking to him, that's still something he wants to do. He wants to finish. If he's top American, he has a good chance to be in the top 6, and that will put him on the team.
Interesting points. I mean, it gets back, though, to the whole thing of how ridiculous is it that USATF announces the qualification system saying that only 3 races are going to count. By the way, 2 of the races are already over. There's nothing you can do about it. It just doesn't make any sense at all. It's like they don't want to acknowledge the fact that runners like to try to qualify, know what's available to them when they qualify, instead of, it sounds like they just want to pick these runners based on these arbitrary criteria. And it's not easy when you don't have a trials race. I get it. Have you guys seen the Japanese system that's come out? It's like multiple pages long. And what they're doing is kind of using a system. They've kind of created their own marathon ranking, whereas you get points. It's kind of like a combination of the World Athletics track rankings, but for the marathon. You get points based on how fast you run, like on a scoring table, but then you get bonus points if it's for how high you place, and you get more points if you're running in the Japanese races. It's literally like a 20-page document to how they're going to pick their world championship team. But I don't really care how you pick the team. Well, I do, but the most important thing to me is announce it on day one of the qualifying process. You don't announce it when 2/3 of the races are over and we're 60% through the qualifying window. So John wrote an article about that on the website. If you haven't seen it, it's just unacceptable, in my opinion, that went on there.
With this World Championship qualifying, New York's going to be slower, probably. So you need to finish 6th. I think there's a decent chance an American could finish 6th. But I don't know. When you look at it, times aren't everything. Noah Droddy, I guess Marathon Project, it's super fast, but you kind of almost have to adjust for that course. Jared Ward has the pedigree, but is he way past his prime? You guys are talking about Brian Schrader because he ran the first half of the Olympic trials. Like, that doesn't really mean anything to me. Ben True obviously has the pedigree. A cool story would be Nathan Martin. He's the fastest African-American black American marathoner ever. But that's 2:11:05.
American born, right? I mean, because obviously Abdi and Meb are faster than him.
Fair point, John. Fair point. African American. I guess that term's out, right? Because
and Canucci. I forgot the American record holder is African American as well.
3 years ago, I think I sometimes would use the word black, and I was called a racist, and now that's gone. And African American in the running sense is so wrong because Meb, Canucci, and Lagat, they are like legit African American, right? Like born in Africa and live in America. So at least that term can mean what it makes more sense to mean. But Nathan Martin, the fastest black-born American marathoner, and the race for the first time ever has a black race director, Ted Metellus.
He's not the fastest black-born American marathoner. Meb and Bernard Lagat were all black-born. You mean American-born black marathoner? For the record, correction there.
Robert with issuing a rare correction. Usually he's the one he's the correctee, not the corrector.
2:11:05. I guess it's almost 2:10. It's crazy how you can put so much emphasis on the time they run. But John, you were telling this off the line. Akira Tomoyasu, a name we have not mentioned on this broadcast, I don't think. He's got a 2:10:29 PB. That's the 9th fastest in the field. And he finished in what place in that race, John?
So, yeah, it's funny. I saw him like, 2:10 from Japan. All right. I mean, he's not one of Japan's best guys, but that's solid. And I look up, where did he run his 2:10:29? He ran it earlier this year at the Lake Biwa Marathon. He finished in 46th place. Can you imagine running 2:10 and finishing 46th? It's just, I forgot how insanely deep that race was.
And that just sort of shows, like, we're talking about Nathan Martin. He ran an American-only race. I mean, there's a couple, I guess, Canadians, right, last year. He gets 9th in that. And now we're talking about doing well in the New York City Marathon? No, it shouldn't happen. So that's all I got to say about the men.
My final thought, Augustine Choge, he's making his quote-unquote debut for it seems like the 4th or 5th time at this point. He's a 1:44 800 guy. He won one of the greatest races of all time, the 2006 Commonwealth Games 5,000 over Craig Mottram. And, it'd be kind of cool to see what a 1:44 guy, he's run 59:32 and a half. I really thought, he might be able to do something, but I think he's either dropped out or withdrawn from like 2 or 3 debuts at this point. So I'm not really holding my breath on him, but kind of interesting. He's a guy who's trained with both Rudisha and Kipchoge during his career. But other than that, I think we can move on to the women's field.